Thank you.
Tim, Purbright, Marielle for many years.
Yeah, it's actually, I was going to say, I spent the first 20 years of my research career working in Fred Brown and working in Purbright, where I wrote a number of papers actually saying FMD vaccines are no good, they're unstable, they don't work, etc., etc. Then I spent the next 17 years making them. So I think I can sort of represent both sides of the coin. But yeah, sure, that's my background, and I spent a short time in Panaptose as well. So Keith asked me to give this presentation. I really am not going to be able to say very much about the last point. That's really about 5 or 6 lectures in their own right. How straightforward would it be to replace them given an alternative? So I'm going to focus mostly on what we know about classical FMD vaccines. Some of it my work, some of it other people's. So let me see, okay. Which is the, you see, I'm not used to giving talks very often. That one. No, that's the off button.
That's the PowerPoint.
How long have I got? I'm getting no. Okay. So it's that one. Oh, it works this time, okay. So vaccination with good quality but not exceptional special vaccines can confer protection in 4 days, and with longer intervals can reduce the probability of persistence after challenge. We showed this some years ago. I don't know, I've got a slide missing. That's it, okay. It's in the wrong order, sorry. So we've heard a little bit about Bernd Haas and the exceptional levels of cross-protection that they reported with serologically diverse strains of the A serotype. And of course, large-scale trivalent vaccine campaigns in Europe and South America were very effective and assisted greatly the control and eradication programs. Now that's some data which we published in the 90s, where we had cattle vaccinated for various periods with an olazan vaccine. And they were challenged at 4 days, 8 days, 12 days, 16 days, 21 days post-vaccination. All of those animals were protected, including the day 4 animals. The 2 control animals were not. And there was evidence that the animals which were solidly protected in the sense of they'd had at the level of 21-day vaccination, there was less likelihood of persistence and less likelihood of the persistence of persistence. This is a slide which kindly provided by Boehringer Animal Health. It was actually vaccines that we made for different banks during the period I was working in Marielle. And without exception, these are all regular vaccines. They were made for banks, but they were all regular payload vaccines. And virtually every vaccine, apart from a few there, were well in excess of 6PD50. So that's the sort of thing that you can make on a regular basis using good quality GMP facilities, good quality materials. Pigs, that experiment I showed earlier with cattle showing protection at day 4, we also did the same experiment in pigs. We had less success. We did get some animals at day 4 which were not protected, but by day 21 to day 28 we were getting animals fully protected. We used 2 adjuvants there, as you can see. The ISA 206, which is widely used by a lot of manufacturers. Okay. Personally, I tend to be rather skeptical about pig protection experiments. Some of the early pig experiments were done where, well, we at least thought there was over-challenge. I'm talking about my pre-Marielle days. That is, pigs which became infected then acted like a super challenge to the other vaccinated pigs. And in fact, some workers actually removed the infected pigs as they developed lesions, which seemed to us rather artificial. But however, that from my mind at least is not very representative of an outbreak in a large intensive pig unit. It really my experience of pig vaccines is that they really contrasted completely with cattle challenge, where it didn't really seem to matter how much challenge virus we threw at the animal, they were fully protected. That experiment I showed earlier, those were all those cattle were exposed to very high levels of virus from 3 infected pigs. It was a contact challenge. So challenge failure, in my experience with cattle, was very rare. In the case of pigs, well, personally, we had less success at the research level, at least. But if you start, we heard about Jake Van Beckham earlier on this week from Aldo's talk. This is some work from the Netherlands, where they had an outbreak in pigs and they started using Frenkel vaccine, and they were able to reduce the significance of the outbreak, the level of the outbreak, the number of cases by vaccination with Frenkel vaccine. So certainly in the field, there's evidence from Europe and in terms of the effectiveness of vaccine in pigs. So various studies have shown that FMD vaccines protect pigs and, equally important, prevent transmission to susceptible pigs. Jerry Salt, who I think was here earlier at least, they reported protection of pigs at 4 days. But equally importantly, vaccination 7 days prior to challenge prevented contact transmission to healthy control pigs, which is a really important thing. FEDRA also, they also reported the reduced excretion of virus from pigs vaccinated 7 days previously. Sheep vaccination, not so much on this, which is unfortunate, but I mean, a lot of goats and sheep are still vaccinated with FMD vaccines, using usually a half or a third of a cattle dose. And this is some work from Paul Barnett at Pirbright, in which you see here, they used half a bovine vaccine dose, and they did a titration of effectively 1 in 1, 1 in 10, 1 in 40. I don't know whether that was a fractional dose or whether that was a diluted vaccine, but you can see that in all of those vaccine groups, they were getting 7 out of 7 protection. That's an aqueous olazan vaccine, which was at that time in the International Vaccine Bank in Pirbright. Okay, so that's something about protection, right? Duration of immunity. This is an old chestnut which keeps on coming up, and it might be supposed that, of course, one goal for a vaccine is to achieve a similar level of protection to animals recovered from natural infection. In fact, with cattle, long-lived immunity has been reported, but it needs to be recognized that the carrier state in cattle was probably providing frequent, if not continuous, immune stimulation throughout the period of the experiment. Whereas, in contrast, pigs recovered from infection can be reinfected with the homologous virus after about 6 months. Mm-hmm. This is some work from Jake Van Beckham again, and it really underlines the effectiveness of some of the European vaccination campaigns. In this particular experiment, Dutch cattle being vaccinated and then boosted after their initial immunizations, being boosted at every year, effectively 54 weeks. And you can see there the green line is the first vaccination. That's what's happening with the younger animals, and then the yellow lines the yellow line shows 1 previous annual vaccination, and then the red line shows 2 or more previous annual vaccinations. So the key thing about this particular slide is that between 0 and 54 weeks, particularly with the animals which have been boosted, they have very high levels of protective antibody, and you would expect them to be protected throughout this period. So the question about duration immunity isn't very good, Well, there isn't evidence, at least from the European field situation, and indeed some of you will know that some 6 or 7 years after the last vaccination round in Europe, there were animals which were still being found seropositive. That's my comment there, so the other point about short duration of immunity, that's after the initial vaccination. Cox showed complete protection at 6 months after a single vaccination using the A22 Iraq vaccine held by the International Vaccine Bank. This is some work also from Leilestat, and it shows these are single vaccinated animals. They've all been vaccinated with 6 PD50 vaccines. There are sheep, cattle, and pigs there, and it shows the antibody titers being durable for 24 weeks from a single vaccination. This sort of answers a question. I wanted to put this slide in mostly because I'm talking about everybody else's work, and I wanted to talk about something I'd done. This sort of answers a question which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, which is that I don't really know why, when we do vaccinations, why we vaccinate at 0 and 4 weeks later or 3 weeks later. Everybody does it. I have no idea where it was actually shown in the literature that the best vaccination regimen was 0, first dose, and 3 weeks to 4 weeks later. And we did some experiments. These were actually done at Marial when I was working there. And we looked at the interval between the first and second vaccinations. I think this is A22 Iraq, but we saw it with 3 or 4. We saw it with the other strains in the vaccine as well. And what it really says is that if you come in at looking at if you look at the yellow line, I'm trying to see which one it is. Yes, if you look at the yellow line, which is where they were vaccinated 0, and then 2 weeks later, and then 6 months, really at 2 weeks later, you don't get anything like a boost response whatsoever. There's no, I'm cautious about the word boost because I don't regard it as a genuine boost, but you see no increase in antibody titer at 2 weeks that's worth speaking of. When you go out to 4 weeks, the sort of the classical vaccination then you do start to see a second antibody response. That's the classical situation, 0 and 4 weeks. But if you can extend the gap between the first and second vaccination, and that's really showing up with the red line. If you can have 2 months between the first and the second dose, you really get a very, very good secondary response. The other points are at 6 months. You can see that they're all boosting. It's not working.
It's not working. Okay.
No, it's just. Okay, sorry. Right, okay. Sorry. Now it's going too quickly. So stability. We hear a lot about stability. 146S is not very stable, is it? How can it possibly make a decent vaccine? Certainly, 146S is not very stable compared to other coronaviruses, so no question about that. And there are a number of publications covering the pH and temperature stabilities of the different serotypes, including our own, and others from Julian and the people at Purbright. And this instability actually represents a well-used justification for the development of novel EuFMD vaccines. But, however, it's not always appreciated that the recognized instability of the virus does not represent a problem when good quality GMP products are used and the cold chain is properly implemented. And I really do need to emphasize this. And I've got several points. This is some of our stability data going back a long time, and it shows the stability of SAT1, SAT2, SAT3, ASHA1, C, O, and A to heating at 49 degrees C. The red lines are the stability of the live virus, and the green lines are the stability of the inactivated virus. The temperature we used was 49 degrees C, and you can see with the SATs on the left, they are coming down very, very quickly. They are very unstable at moderate temperatures. Whereas if you want to contrast it with polio, we did some work with polio with our Osterhaus many years ago. Polio, much more stable. Okay, it's 45 degrees C, but you can see it's stable for days at 45 degrees C, a much tougher virus. So it's tempting to suggest that stability is an absolutely critical factor in the potency of EuFMD vaccines. And I mean, there are relationships between the general perceived potency of EuFMD vaccines in relation to stability. I mean, we made this point. A and ASHA1 vaccines are usually very good ones. They produce high levels of potency. They are the most stable viruses in terms of thermal stability. They are better than O and C, which are pretty good vaccines, which are more stable than SAT1, SAT2, and SAT3, which are notoriously unstable. So there is a pecking order with stability and with the effectiveness of those vaccines. But I mean, of course, inactivated polio is even more stable, but it doesn't have the challenge of preventing spread of the virus in the population. So it's not really a very fair comparison. So this is a little bit about registration, and I think when we talk about stability, I think it's extremely important to recognize that when you register a new veterinary medicine in Europe, you have to demonstrate the shelf life of the product amongst a host of other requirements. So with EuFMD, this represents 3 batches of vaccines stored at the recommended temperature for a claimed shelf life, and you're usually required to do shelf life plus 3 months. So if you say my vaccine has a shelf life for 12 months, you have to show that it's stable for 15 months rather. It will still do the job at 15 months. So a vaccine with a initial claim of 3BT50 and a shelf life of 12 months must still be 3BT50 at 15 months. For a registered product, a routine stability testing program is required to demonstrate that the product continues to perform as claimed. This is particularly significant with EuFMD because of the occasional adaptation of new vaccine strains, which may have completely different stabilities. I mean, there are rogue viruses. I remember there was an old Hong Kong virus from the 80s, which just fell apart the moment you showed it BEI. In addition, it's also a requirement that some specific properties constituents of the vaccine are now tested over the same period of time, and notably preservatives, in the case of oil vaccines, viscosity, to demonstrate that not just the potency is there, but the sterility and all the other important characteristics of the vaccine are still in place at the end of the 12-month or 15-month period. So the bottom line is that EuFMD vaccine properly manufactured stability does not represent an issue when cold chains are properly controlled and maintained and good quality GMP products are used. But it is recognized, of course, that in many field situations, storage and application of the vaccine will be compromised, and stability of the product in general will have a part to play in the effectiveness of the vaccination campaign. So that's a really, really very important area where cold chain has to be fully respected. I should have mentioned, incidentally, that one thing once again required in Europe, not only at the time of registration do you need to demonstrate that your vaccine has the stability which you claim, you also have to do that on a routine rolling program. So a vaccine manufacturer has to demonstrate that its vaccines regularly are tested and routinely tested. So they may be running through 3 or 4 batches per year to demonstrate that their claimed stability, according to the registration documents, is maintained during the whole of their production life cycle. So that's a requirement. This is one of the problem areas, but I think it's probably overlooked. We've talked about cold chains and what have you, but there's the issue of maternal antibodies, which I think is still greatly overlooked. This is some data from Ivo Gomez at Panaftosa, going back, I can't remember the date, but it goes back a long time, and really shows that what we have here are pairs of calves of approximately the same age. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Can I go back? No. Oh, okay. You have, let me see, is this the indicator? No. Okay. Top left, you have 2 calves which are 6 and 8 days of age. Let's take bottom right if you like. You have 2 calves, 64 days of age. The red line is an oil vaccine. The blue line is aluminum hydroxide saponin vaccine. And what it basically shows is that if you immunize in the face of maternal immunity, you don't get a decent vaccine response. It's only when you go out to something like 105 days, that's the that's where you start to see a boost, where you start to see the vaccine have an effect. So maternal antibody is really a very major issue, and particularly if the animals aren't readily available, they're migrating, or they're in summer pastures, winter pastures, etc. You can't get at the animals necessarily when you want to, and maternal antibody is a big issue. That's something which needs to be addressed. So I commented there about the issue of maternal antibodies, and perhaps that's manageable. I mean, this is, to some extent, I've said this is manageable with high-value, long-lived cattle, dairy cattle, but it's clearly a big issue where you have high turnover populations of pigs, millions of pigs, rather, not thousands, but millions of pigs being turned over and fattened and slaughtered at 6 months of age. Clearly, the maternal antibody issue there is going to be a major one. Okay. Simple. How am I doing? Okay. But
yeah, about 10 minutes.
Fine. Okay. I tried to do a little bit with the going forward in terms of some of the limitations, but virus grown we go back to the 1950s, things were really very simple. Virus grown in bovine tongue epithelium from slaughterhouses. You heard that from, that's the work that was developed by Simon Frenkel. Formaldehyde and aluminum hydroxide, little or no purification. I mean, those sorts of vaccines were great vaccines and they worked, but they would be absolutely no way that they could be accepted now for a commercial production. The very least, you would have to adventitious agent test every cow that you were taking the tongue from. Compare that with 2018, where everything is fully tested. All the viruses have to be adventitious agents testing, which really is a massive amount of work. You have to test for all possible agents, mycoplasmas, sterility, etc., etc. They have to be grown in pure BHK cells, so cells have to be demonstrated free from adventitious agents. You have BEI inactivation, of course, which totally replaced formaldehyde, because formaldehyde was rejected because of the residual tail of infectivity that it allowed. And of course, purification now to at least reduce NS proteins to the extent that they don't induce NS antibodies. And full GMP manufacturing. So the challenge to bring a novel FMD vaccine to market, I mean, it's a huge amount of work, of time and money. And you have to think with particular reference to safety and efficacy in the target species. So if I have a new vaccine, I have to consider what species I'm going to put it into. I'm going to put it into cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, buffalo. Almost certainly all of those species I will want my product to be licensed for. If I don't carry out tests on those species, I can't make a claim. I can't put on the label of my vaccine, this is suitable for use in sheep at 1/3 of a dose or 1/4 of a dose, because if I don't have the data. You also have to consider their physiological conditions. Adult animals, young animals, animals with or without maternally derived antibody, pregnant animals, dairy cattle. All of those conditions have to be considered when you are looking at developing and licensing a brand new veterinary medicine. You have to do safety of the dose, a single dose, and a repeated dose, and an overdose, including pathology at the site of inoculation. You have to do efficacy by challenge. Now, I mean, most of you will know that in the OIE manual, Freudian slip, the European Pharmacopoeia does not have a challenge test for pigs or sheep or goats. It has a challenge test for cattle. That's the only challenge test. So if you want to come up with a new vaccine and make a claim for it, you're going to have to, it's going to be really very, very tricky because you don't have the tools to effectively allow you to make the claim. So the big question, would pigs and sheep and buffalo be allowed to, sorry about the pun, be permitted to piggyback on cattle efficacy and safety? Okay, it happened in the past, but It's been allowed to happen in the past, but the problem is that regulators don't look back, they look forward. They're saying, okay, you have a new EuFMD vaccine, so we want it to be better than the last one. We want it to be proven to work in X, Y, Z. So regulators they will not necessarily say, well, you got away with it for your previous vaccines, but I'm not sure that we're going to allow it for the future. So manufacturing cost. Modern pharmaceutical facilities, manufacturing equipment is very expensive. You heard that from Pascal earlier this week. Requires scheduled maintenance validation. Probably the most single important factor here is the active ingredient productivity achieved with the production facility, and will have a significant impact on cost of goods manufactured. Quality control of EuFMD vaccines is also very expensive, requiring testing all batches in the target species as well as occasional safety testing. An important objective for any novel EuFMD vaccine will be to establish a very robust in vitro method to determine product quality and correlate this closely with a substantial body of animal safety and efficacy data. The ultimate goal being to eradicate the need to test animals. Quality assurance in a modern pharmaceutical facility now carries a major cost, both in head count and the time spent complying with GMP. I estimated when I was working in Marielle that probably 50% of every employee's time was taken up with some element of QA. QA, you literally operate totally under QA conditions. Technicians, all members of staff, including engineering, because engineering are involved in validation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, 5.
5, okay. I think there's just one point about cost of buildings, and I've heard this argument. There will be biosecurity advantages of manufacturing a non-infectious active ingredient, but I think there needs to be something of a realization that the GMP facilities are very expensive in themselves. When you think that with a major EuFMD factory, maybe 10% of your floor area is actually going to be the biosecure area. The other 80 to 90% are actually going to be areas which are outside of the virus zone. It's where you're going to do your purification probably, because your antigens will have been activated. And it's also going to be where you do your filling and your formulation. And just to give you some idea of the demands, I just took this out of the EU GMP. These are the requirements. Column A, row A rather, is for vaccine bottling and sterility testing. It's the number of microbial contaminants that you are allowed in settle plates, in contact plates, and in what we call finger dabs. You'll notice it's less than 1. So if you're bottling tens of thousands of doses with everybody gowned up, trying to get less than 1 microbial contaminant per contact plate, etc., is really tough. And that has to operate within a grade B environment, which equally has very, very tough restrictions. Those conditions in themselves place enormous cost and pressures on vaccine manufacturers. I think I probably would just wrap up very quickly now. A new product should demonstrate a significant advantage over existing products. I've said it before, regulators are naturally conservative by nature. They're unlikely to be flexible unless there is an extremely strong advantage over the conventional licensed product. The only time they bend rules are when you have something like an Ebola outbreak. Then the rules get bent. But they're not going to be that flexible about a novel EuFMD vaccine. How long will this take? Oh, okay. That is. I'm going to conclude there. How long is this going to take to get to a new vaccine? I don't know. As long as a piece of string, possibly. But that's where I finish. Okay.